Brandon Miller walked with heavy footsteps down the uneven sidewalk, his worn-out briefcase scraping his knee at every step, but an unexpected twist was about to transform his day in a way no one could have foreseen. He had no idea that his desperate job search would collide with a heart-pounding rescue, changing not only his future, but the lives of everyone in his orbit. Before we carry on, let me know where you are watching from in the comments and hit that subscribe button for something special tomorrow. Brandon's life had been a series of closed doors for the past few months, and today was no exception. He had awakened with shaky optimism, hoping that the interview he had scheduled would finally break the cycle of rejections. In the small, cramped office of an aging building, he had poured his heart out to a potential employer who looked at him with a mix of pity and impatience. Brandon pleaded his case. He had strong organizational skills, was a quick learner, and needed this job more than anything. He had a son, Sam, waiting at home, and late rent notices piling up on his kitchen table. The interviewer, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a stack of resumes taller than Brandon's elbow, sighed and explained that he simply did not have the budget to hire an inexperienced candidate for the advertised position. The man thanked Brandon for his time, handed back his wrinkled resume, and wished him luck. Brandon pressed his lips together, nodded, and trudged out, feeling the weight of disappointment settle on his shoulders once more. His finances were in a precarious state. He remembered vividly the conversation he had had with his landlord just a few days earlier, the man's cold tone and the ultimatum that if Brandon did not come up with the rent in 2 weeks, he would need to find another place to live. Brandon had tried to bargain for more time, explaining that he had potential job interviews lined up, that he was actively looking for consistent work, and that he would get back on track as soon as he could. But those words had sounded hollow, even to him. Now, another rejection letter would add to the stack building on the corner of his kitchen counter. As he walked home, he tried to gather the courage to pick up groceries for dinner that night. But when he opened his wallet, he found only a few tattered bills and a handful of coins. Sam would need his father to provide for him. That alone was enough reason for Brandon to keep pushing through, no matter how dire his situation seemed. He turned down a long street lined with brownstones, each one stained with decades of rain, wind, and stories from previous generations. He often found himself wondering about the lives lived in those homes, the dinners cooked in those kitchens, and the arguments and reconciliations that took place behind closed doors. He wondered how many people inside those houses were quietly battling their own struggles. Some of them might have lost jobs. Others might be dealing with heartaches, sicknesses, or regrets. If only it were possible to see the invisible burdens everyone carried, maybe it would be easier to empathize. Brandon realized, though, that if everyone laid out their troubles in the street for comparison, many might still not be able to find a single solution. So all he could do was keep his head held high. After all, that was what his mother had always told him. Never let them see you defeated. She had been the strong anchor of his youth, always believing that tomorrow held new opportunities, especially when today felt bleak. Crossing the intersection, he spotted the railway tracks that cut through the neighborhood. Over the years, the local government had debated placing safety barriers or even rerouting the tracks, but budget cuts and bureaucratic delays meant there was still only a thin metal gate and a flickering set of warning lights protecting people from the trains that rushed by several times a day. Brandon paused briefly as he approached the crossing, letting an older couple pass him. He took in the faint smell of grease and metal that always hovered near the railway. It was a scent he associated with his childhood when he and his friends would place coins on the tracks just to watch them flatten. The memories were bittersweet now, reminding him of simpler times before he was saddled with responsibilities and adult worries. He sighed, adjusting the strap of his briefcase on his shoulder, wishing he had good news to share with Sam later that night. That was when he heard a scream that snapped him out of his gloom like a sudden jolt of electricity. The cry cut through the air, thin and desperate, carried on a breeze that rustled the fading leaves of the few trees near the tracks. Brandon's entire body tensed, adrenaline pumping as he scanned the scene ahead. At first, he could not pinpoint where the scream was coming from. He saw a group of pedestrians on the sidewalk, some turning their heads in alarm, Then his eyes locked on a frantic woman near the tracks, her face etched with terror, her arms flailing as she tried to wrestle with a stroller stuck between two rail ties. The front wheel seemed lodged in a gap, and the woman could not lift it out by herself. Inside the stroller was a boy, not more than 2 or 3 years old, wailing in fright. A wave of panic seized Brandon. He glanced toward the horizon of the tracks, saw no immediate sign of a train, but he knew they sometimes came from the other direction with minimal warning. And when they did, they came fast. He dropped his briefcase, ignoring the rush of people around him who either stood frozen or dashed forward uncertainly, and sprinted toward the crossing. His heart hammered in his chest. He was not the strongest man, but fatherhood had given him hidden reserves of strength and determination. As he reached the stroller, the mother was tugging at it, tears streaming down her face as she pleaded for help. Brandon snapped into motion. He felt the rigid metal of the stroller frame in his hands and yanked upward with every bit of power he could muster. The front wheel popped free with a hideous squeal of twisting metal. The mother stumbled backward, still clinging to the handlebar. For a second, Brandon lost his balance, and they nearly tumbled onto the tracks together. And then came the distant thunder of a horn, echoing down the line. That noise made Brandon's heart drop. The train was approaching. He did not have time to check which direction it was coming from. He locked his elbows and forced the stroller all the way off the tracks, pivoting so his back was to the rails. Another stranger grabbed the mother's arm and helped pull her clear, ensuring she would not tumble back onto the tracks in a panic. Brandon's muscles quivered from the burst of effort. He barely had a moment to catch his breath before the crossing lights flashed brighter and the rhythmic ding-ding-ding of the railway alarm blared. A train barreled past with a deafening roar, rattling the gravel, sending a gust of wind that whipped hair and clothing in all directions. The mother collapsed to her knees, hugging the stroller, tears mixing with gratitude and shock. The boy inside the stroller was crying, but otherwise unharmed, and Brandon felt a rush of relief that he had made it in time. Bystanders who had witnessed the rescue stared wide-eyed, some murmuring prayers or thanks. A few called out to Brandon, praising his quick thinking, but he felt self-conscious in that moment. The surge of adrenaline ebbed, replaced by an odd embarrassment that he was at the center of attention. He asked the mother softly if she and her child were okay. She nodded numbly, too shaken to speak. Her hand found Brandon's and squeezed it, a silent expression of profound gratitude that words could not quite capture. Sirens wailed in the distance, an indication that someone had alerted the authorities or an ambulance. Sensing the mother and child would be in good hands, Brandon gently extricated himself from the small crowd that had gathered. He retrieved his battered briefcase, which felt heavier now, perhaps because of the lingering weight of adrenaline. He caught a glimpse of the little boy's face, streaked with tears, not fully understanding what had just happened. Brandon gave him a soft nod, trying to muster a reassuring smile even as his own nerves were trembling. The mother was saying something, perhaps asking him to stay, but the cacophony of the scene drowned her voice. Flashing lights and more onlookers converged. Cameras held up high to capture the dramatic aftermath. Sensing the swirl of attention, Brandon stepped back even further, wanting to avoid the cameras and the questions that might follow. With one final glance, he turned and slipped away into the mass of people, disappearing before anyone could stop him. It was not that he did not want recognition, but rather that he had never been comfortable with the spotlight. And he could not shake the feeling that if someone asked for his name and details, they might discover he was a desperate man out of work, behind on rent, barely scraping by. He had already poured all his energy into a failed interview that day, and he just wanted to get home to Sam, who would be waiting for him with innocent eyes and a question about what was for dinner. Besides, Brandon reasoned, he had done what any decent human being would do. There was no need to linger around for applause. As he navigated the busier streets leading to his apartment building, Brandon's mind spun with what had just happened. The images replayed on a loop, the stroller stuck in the track, the frantic mother, the distant rumble of the oncoming train, the desperate yank to free the wheel. He wondered how close they had come to tragedy. Had he hesitated a moment longer, the outcome could have been unimaginably worse. His legs felt shaky as he finally climbed the creaking stairs to his unit on the third floor of a rundown building on the outskirts of the city. The hallway smelled of stale bread and disinfectant, a mixture of odors that reminded him how badly he wanted to move somewhere better, but that would require a stable job and enough pay to get ahead of his debts. He opened the door to his apartment and was greeted by Sam, his 7-year-old son, who was perched at the small wooden table where he typically did his homework. Sam was coloring a picture of a spaceship hurtling through the stars, a reflection of the boy's boundless imagination. The child looked up and saw the exhaustion in his father's face. He asked if the job interview had gone well, his eyes hopeful, as if maybe this was the day his dad's luck would finally change. Brandon managed a tired smile, ruffled Sam's hair, and admitted that it did not work out as he had hoped. Sam's shoulders slumped with a quiet disappointment that Brandon recognized and hated to see. Despite everything, Sam did not press further, as though he had sensed that his father could not handle more questions right now. Brandon wanted to tell Sam about the rescue. He wanted to share how terrifying, and also how strangely exhilarating it had been to save that little boy. But the words stuck in his throat. He was not sure how Sam would react, or whether he would fully grasp the weight of that moment. Plus, Brandon was not entirely ready to relive it. Instead, he changed the subject and asked Sam what he wanted for dinner. Sam shrugged, suggesting maybe they could whip up the last box of mac and cheese from the cupboard. Brandon was not proud that their meals often came from boxes or cans, but it was all he could afford at the moment. The produce section of the grocery store had become a luxury he rarely indulged in. So father and son worked together, stirring powdered cheese into boiled noodles until the kitchen was filled with the modest aroma of processed cheese. As they ate, Sam chattered about his day at school. He talked about how he had studied the solar system, how he learned that Jupiter was the largest planet, and how his friend Derek had once again claimed that Pluto should still be a planet, no matter what scientists said. Brandon nodded along, letting Sam's innocent enthusiasm wash over him like a gentle balm. He loved these small, everyday moments, even though a shadow of worry lingered over how many more dinners they could share in this apartment if he continued to come up short on rent. He tried to mask his anxiety with a smile, responding to Sam's excitement with genuine praise and curiosity. That night, after tucking Sam into bed, Brandon sat at the rickety kitchen table, the overhead light buzzing quietly. He fiddled with his phone, noticing there were dozens of missed notifications, calls, text messages, and social media alerts. That was unusual for a man who typically did not receive more than the occasional spam call or an automated reminder about overdue bills. Curious, he started reading through them and realized something extraordinary had happened. Videos of the rescue had been captured on countless phones, and the internet was ablaze with talk of an anonymous man who had saved a little boy from a horrifying disaster on the railroad tracks. People were sharing these videos on every platform, praising the unknown hero who had disappeared into the crowd. Hashtags were popping up, urging others to identify him and thank him. Witnesses were describing the event, using words like heroic, selfless, and life-saving. Brandon's heart pounded as he scrolled through comments. People were calling for him to come forward, offering to donate money to him, wanting to express their gratitude. The mother was especially desperate to find him, her emotional post going viral as she wrote about how this unnamed stranger had saved her child's life. She included a photograph of her little boy, safe and smiling, along with a heartfelt plea to anyone who might know the man's identity. She felt compelled to give him the thanks he deserved, and more. Brandon was staggered. He knew the modern age of social media meant these stories could blow up in a blink, but he never imagined he would be at the center of one. Part of him was worried, unsure if he wanted this kind of attention. Another part of him was touched, even validated, by the warm outpouring of gratitude from strangers. Over the next several days, Brandon continued to watch the frenzy grow. Each morning, after seeing Sam off to school, Brandon would scroll through his phone, seeing the mother's public pleas become more emotional, as she recounted that moment on the tracks and how she had been sure her child was doomed if no one intervened. She implored local journalists and even the city council to help locate the hero who had vanished. Brandon glanced at the stack of late notices, then back at his phone. He saw that a few reporters were offering cash rewards, no questions asked, to the man if he would step forward and give them an exclusive interview. Brandon felt tempted, but he was also cautious. What if someone used the publicity to dig into his past and find out about his financial struggles? Would that humiliate him, or worse, cause him to lose credibility? Meanwhile, Sam started noticing news segments on television about the mystery man at the railroad crossing. One evening, he exclaimed that the anonymous hero looked a little like Dad in the video. Brandon stiffened at the question. He tried to wave it off, insisting that the footage was grainy and that lots of men wore dark jackets and had the same build. Sam was curious, but he did not press the matter, probably sensing that Brandon was uncomfortable discussing it. Brandon wrestled with conflicting emotions. On one hand, he felt that coming forward might let him finally connect with the mother and accept her gratitude in person. But on the other hand, he did not want the attention or the potential complications that could arise. Unbeknownst to Brandon, the child's parents were far more resourceful and persistent than he had anticipated. Though the mother had been alone at the crossing when the incident occurred, the father was a man of some influence, running a successful family business that had grown from a small, home-based enterprise into a large manufacturing firm. He had connections in local media outlets and plenty of resources to direct at the search for the unknown savior. While Brandon tried to return to his regular life submitting resumes, calling about job openings, preparing simple meals for Sam the father, set investigators on the trail of any leads or rumors. Determined to find the man who had saved his child, he pulled strings, following up on every social media tip, every snippet of a clue from cell phone footage. One midweek evening, as Brandon was microwaving leftovers for Sam's dinner, there was a knock on the apartment door. Brandon's stomach twisted into knots. He rarely had visitors. The landlord usually just slipped letters under his door rather than confront him, and his neighbors mostly kept to themselves. Carefully setting down the bowl, Brandon approached the door and peered through the tiny peephole. A man in a crisp suit stood there, accompanied by a woman in casual attire. They both looked serious and expectant. Brandon swallowed hard, then opened the door a crack. The man introduced himself as Elijah Rivers, father of the boy in the stroller, the man whose child Brandon had saved from the train. The woman beside him was the mother, her eyes filled with tears of relief the moment she saw Brandon's face. Brandon's heart pounded so loudly he was certain they could hear it. He stammered something about not wanting trouble, but the mother quickly assured him that they were not here to cause any. She explained that they had recognized him from some of the video footage that a private investigator had analyzed. She also confessed that the moment he turned around on the crossing, she had etched his face into her memory. She extended her hand, and though her voice trembled slightly, she conveyed her family's immense gratitude. Elijah nodded, removing a business card from his pocket and offering it to Brandon, asking if they could speak privately for a moment. Brandon hesitated, glancing over his shoulder, but Sam was busy in the living room with a noisy cartoon, and curiosity pressed him to invite them inside. They stepped into the modest apartment, immediately noticing the peeling wallpaper, the faint smell of cooked noodles, and the worn-out furniture. Brandon gestured apologetically, but they waved off any concerns about appearance. The mother's name was Charlotte, and she smiled kindly, her eyes darting to Sam in the living room before she introduced herself properly. As they all sat down, Elijah cleared his throat. His tone was measured, a mixture of seriousness and gratitude. He explained that they had been searching everywhere for Brandon, not just because they wanted to say thank you, but because they felt compelled to do more. Brandon folded his hands, uncertain how to respond. He tried to deflect, suggesting that they did not need to worry about him, that he had only done what anyone would do in that situation. But Charlotte's gaze was warm and insistent, letting him know that she would not accept such dismissive modesty. Elijah went on to reveal that he came from a family business background, that his relatives had started a small manufacturing operation decades ago, which had now expanded across multiple states. Their success had enabled them to live comfortably, even lavishly. He admitted that life had blessed him with resources and connections, and he felt responsible for using them to support people who demonstrated humanity and bravery. He slid an envelope across the table toward Brandon, who stared at it skeptically. Elijah explained that inside the envelope was a check of substantial sum. Brandon's eyes widened, and his instinctive reaction was to refuse. It felt too large, too sudden, too unearned, as if maybe he was stealing from them. But Elijah insisted, explaining that no amount of money could equate to the life of their son, and this was the least they could do to show appreciation for the man who had risked his own life to save him. Charlotte added that they understood Brandon had not come forward for recognition, but she hoped he would accept their help as a gesture of sincere gratitude. She also mentioned that there might be other ways they could assist, such as with employment or references. Brandon's pride warred with his desperation. Bills and late notices flashed through his mind, as did the memory of that day's fruitless job interview. He managed to whisper a thank you, but confessed that he felt overwhelmed and needed time to think. Elijah and Charlotte nodded, respecting his caution. They exchanged contact information, and Charlotte made him promise not to vanish again, as she wanted the chance to introduce him to their son properly, in a calmer setting, so the boy could see the man who had saved him. That night, after Sam had gone to bed, Brandon sat at the table, staring at the envelope in front of him. His heart hammered as he opened it, revealing a check with a sum of money that dwarfed anything he had ever held in his entire life. He felt dizzy, as though the numbers might vanish if he blinked too many times. 1,000 worries peppered his mind. Would accepting this money mean he owed them in some intangible way? What if it created a sense of obligation? What if they expected him to do something he could not deliver? But a glimmer of hope also began to shine. This could be the lifeline he needed to cover back rent and buy groceries without counting pennies. It could give him the breathing room to keep searching for a stable job. Most of all, it could ensure Sam did not have to live under the constant threat of eviction. Brandon had always wanted to be a provider and role model for his son, and this kind of security would be a monumental relief. Days passed, and Brandon continued to grapple with the decision. He did not deposit the check right away, partly because of uncertainty, and partly because he was trying to process the emotional weight of it all. Meanwhile, Elijah and Charlotte reached out periodically via text, asking if they could arrange a casual meetup, maybe over dinner or at a playground, so the children could meet. Brandon did not reply to every message immediately, but eventually, he found himself agreeing to a quiet Saturday lunch. He had told Sam a sanitized version of the story, simply that he had helped a woman one day, and now they wanted to say thank you. Sam was curious but did not pry too deeply. He seemed excited to meet new people, especially since his social world mostly revolved around school and their tiny apartment. When Saturday came, Brandon and Sam took a bus to a neighborhood with manicured lawns and lavish homes. The place felt a world away from their cramped city apartment. He walked hand in hand with Sam up a stone walkway leading to a tasteful, modern house with large windows and a broad front porch. The yard was meticulously landscaped, complete with vibrant flowers and well-trimmed hedges. Brandon felt a pang of nervousness gnaw at him as he rang the doorbell. Within moments, the door opened, revealing Elijah and Charlotte, both dressed casually but exuding an air of elegance. Their little boy, Oliver, peeked out from behind Charlotte's legs, showing a shy curiosity. Sam blinked in awe at the wide-open space behind them, the polished floors, and the scent of fresh-baked bread drifting from the kitchen. Charlotte welcomed them warmly, bending down to greet Sam at eye level and introducing Oliver to him. At first, Oliver clung to his mother's hand, but he relaxed when Sam asked if he liked superheroes. That simple question was enough to spark a conversation between the boys, who soon disappeared down the hallway, chattering about the action figures lined up on a bookshelf. Brandon felt a mixture of relief and awkwardness, unsure how to navigate the hospitality being extended to him. Elijah clapped him gently on the shoulder and led him inside, offering something to drink, making sure Brandon understood that he was an honored guest in their home. They settled at a round dining table that was set for 4 adults and 2 children, though for the moment, the boys were off playing in another room under close watch by an open doorway. The conversation started tentatively, with polite small talk about the weather, the city, and common interests. Charlotte asked about Sam's hobbies, his school, and whether he had everything he needed for the upcoming academic projects. Brandon felt a tightness in his chest when he realized Sam had been skipping certain extracurriculars due to lack of funds, but he tried to keep the topic light. Elijah explained more about his family business, how it had started as a small woodshop run by his grandfather, eventually branching out into manufacturing and distribution. Brandon found it impressive. though he was also wary of venturing into territory that felt so far from his own financial reality. He did not want them to think he was silently angling for more money. Eventually, Charlotte set down her fork, her eyes sincere as she thanked Brandon once again for saving Oliver's life. She told him that no amount of money or gratitude could ever repay him fully, but they wanted to do whatever they could to make his life more comfortable. Elijah cleared his throat, explaining that while the check was one part of their thanks, he had another proposal. He wanted to see if Brandon might be interested in joining their family-run business, not just in a token position, but in a role that could leverage Brandon's existing skills with room for upward mobility. Brandon blinked, taken aback. He confessed that he had been searching for jobs for months, though his background was not in manufacturing. Elijah smiled, saying that his company needed all kinds of talent, from logistics and coordination to sales and marketing. If Brandon was willing to learn, they were willing to teach. Brandon's mind reeled, remembering the frustration and humiliation of repeated rejections. Was this too good to be true? He voiced his concerns, worried that maybe Elijah was offering this only out of guilt or as a form of charity. Elijah put those fears to rest by elaborating how he and Charlotte admired Brandon's character, not just from the rescue, but from the modest life he was leading, raising a bright child like Sam with unwavering devotion. They wanted someone with that kind of grit and determination in their company. Charlotte added that they had done a bit of research and knew about Brandon's struggles, but they did not see that as a negative. They saw it as a testament to his resilience. Their business had grown because the founders and employees all embraced the spirit of helping each other through tough times. Brandon felt emotions well up in his chest relief, gratitude, disbelief, and a twinge of pride in the fact that someone finally recognized his perseverance. The lunch lasted well into the afternoon, with the children eventually rejoining them, giggling and showing off scribbled drawings of superheroes saving trains and people. Charlotte laughed, remarking that Oliver had clearly been inspired by a real-life hero. Brandon smiled shyly, patting Oliver gently on the head, feeling a surge of affection for the little boy who had almost perished on those tracks. He noticed Sam getting along wonderfully with Oliver, as if bridging the gap between their contrasting lifestyles without any hesitation. At one point, Sam asked if Oliver could come play at their apartment sometime, and Oliver beamed, nodding enthusiastically. The parents exchanged looks, a silent understanding passing between them that they wanted to foster this budding friendship. By the end of the day, Brandon left with more than a full stomach. He carried a sense of hope he had not felt in months. He agreed to consider the job offer seriously, promising to give them an answer soon. On the bus ride home, Sam snuggled up to his father's side, yawning contentedly. Brandon's heart swelled, thinking of the future that might be within reach. He caught his reflection in the bus window and almost did not recognize the faint spark of optimism in his own eyes. When they arrived back at the apartment, Brandon tucked Sam in and lingered by the bedroom door, watching his son drift into peaceful sleep. In the dim light, the envelope with the check still sat on the kitchen table, glinting with the promise of financial stability. Brandon realized that, maybe for the first time in a long while, things could be different. Word spread quickly among neighbors and acquaintances that Brandon was the man who had saved a toddler from the train. At first, he was wary of the attention. People in the building nodded at him in a new way, with respect rather than apathy, sometimes offering a quiet remark like, "I heard what you did, pretty brave." The corner store clerk, who used to barely look at him, now asked about Sam and whether they were doing well. Brandon sensed an odd mixture of pride and discomfort. He had never craved the limelight, but he also appreciated that people seemed to see him in a new light. He hoped it would not turn into something exploitative, like if the local news tried to camp outside his door, or if unscrupulous folks tried to twist the story for their gain. Days turned into a week, and Brandon met with Elijah and Charlotte a couple more times. They took him on a tour of the manufacturing plant, a sprawling facility on the outskirts of the city, humming with machines and staffed by workers who seemed surprisingly upbeat given the repetitive nature of their tasks. Elijah introduced him around, proudly showing him every department, from raw materials to final product assembly, from human resources to accounts, explaining how each was vital to the overall success. Brandon felt overwhelmed, but also intrigued. It reminded him of how puzzle pieces fit together to form a bigger picture, and for the first time, he could see himself potentially becoming part of that puzzle. He liked the atmosphere, the sense of collaboration and mutual respect that he observed between management and employees. During the tour, Elijah explained they had an opening in their logistics coordination department. It was not a glamorous position. It would involve overseeing shipping schedules, ensuring orders were processed accurately, and troubleshooting any issues that arose on the road. But it was steady work with a decent salary, benefits, and potential bonuses if productivity targets were met. Brandon's mind raced as he considered everything this would mean: a stable environment, medical coverage for Sam, the opportunity to learn new skills. It felt almost too good to be real. And yet, in the back of his mind, he wondered if he would be able to handle the steep learning curve. He confessed these doubts to Elijah, who reassured him that on-the-job training would be provided and that the most important qualities were diligence and a willingness to learn, which Brandon already had in spades. That afternoon, Brandon found himself signing some initial paperwork, feeling a knot of excitement in his stomach. He had not officially started yet. There were still background checks and procedural steps to complete, but it all felt like it was truly happening. Later, while Sam was at school, Brandon took a quiet moment to sit in a park near their apartment. He looked around at the other people enjoying the benches or walking their dogs, and the clang of city traffic in the distance was oddly comforting. He thought about how a single Momenta stroller stuck on train tracks had pivoted his life in such an unimaginable direction. He sighed, the autumn air crisp in his lungs, and felt gratitude for the chance he had almost missed that day. Perhaps, he mused, the rejections and hardship had led him to be in the right place at the right time, ready to act without hesitation. He took out his phone and called Charlotte, letting her know he would accept the position and asking if they could finalize the details soon. Her voice on the other end was filled with joy, and she teased him for taking so long to decide. She told him that Oliver had been talking nonstop about Sam, and it might be fun for the two families to get together again soon. Brandon smiled, picturing Sam and Oliver romping around some playground. He agreed that it was a good idea, then hung up, a faint smile still playing on his lips. For so long, life had felt like a constant uphill struggle, but now the path felt more manageable. He allowed himself a quiet moment to bask in that sense of relief. A few days later, Brandon finalized paperwork for the job, and Elijah handed him a neatly arranged folder with a starting date, employee handbook, and an overview of his salary and benefits. Brandon's eyes misted slightly as he scanned the document. She never imagined a day would come so soon when he could provide this level of security for his son. He thanked Elijah profusely, who shook his hand with genuine warmth. Charlotte stood by, carrying Oliver, who had fallen asleep on her shoulder after a day of excitement. She whispered a gentle goodbye as Brandon left, promising that they would see each other soon at the new job orientation. When Brandon got home, he could hardly wait to tell Sam the news. In a flurry of excitement, he sat Sam down on the couch. Sam listened wide-eyed as Brandon explained he had gotten a stable position, complete with a paycheck that meant they could settle their rent issues and even consider moving to a safer neighborhood. Sam smiled, a bit uncertain but happy because his father was so thrilled. Brandon hugged his son tightly, promising that better days were ahead. That evening, Brandon took Sam out for a small celebratory dinner at a local pizza place they both loved, indulging in extra toppings and soda, which was a treat they rarely splurged on. The small corner booth in the restaurant was filled with laughter, relief, and the subtle taste of hope. Sam excitedly talked about how he wanted to decorate his new bedroom if they moved, maybe with glow-in-the-dark stars, so he could imagine he was traveling through space each night. Brandon nodded, letting the boys' words paint a vision of their future, one that did not feel so distant anymore. A few more days passed, and with Brandon's deposit from the check, he squared things with his landlord, who looked at him with obvious surprise that he suddenly had enough to cover back rent and next month's rent. Brandon said little about where the money had come from, only that he was finally working. He got the sense that his landlord was curious, but not enough to pry. At least that immediate worry was off his shoulders. He even spent some of the money on new clothes for Sam, who had been wearing shoes that were coming apart at the seams. They took a rare father and son trip to a discount store, and Sam picked out a shiny new pair of sneakers with excitement. Brandon watched Sam's face light up when he tried them on. That expression alone justified everything Brandon had gone through. When Brandon arrived at the family business for his orientation, he felt butterflies in his stomach, just as he had on his very first day of school so many years ago. A warm-faced HR coordinator guided him through the building, highlighting safety protocols, employee benefits, and training schedules. Brandon noted with relief that the staff seemed genuinely happy to be there, far cry from the disinterested expression he had seen in so many offices during his fruitless job hunts. By midday, Elijah joined him for lunch in the employee cafeteria, introducing him to some of the supervisors. One of them would be Brandon's mentor in logistics. She was a no-nonsense woman named Teresa, who had decades of experience and a reputation for running a tight ship, but also being fair and encouraging to new hires. Brandon tried to hide his nerves as he asked her a few questions, to which she responded confidently. In a matter of minutes, he found himself respecting her competence and straightforward attitude. The next couple of weeks flew by. Each morning, Brandon got Sam ready for school, now able to give him a small allowance for lunch instead of the free cafeteria meal Sam used to rely on. Then Brandon would head to the plant, greet his new colleagues, and dive into learning everything from shipping schedules to data entry systems. It was a steep learning curve, but Teresa guided him patiently. She was impressed by how quickly Brandon picked up the workflow, and she commended him for his attention to detail. The entire environment felt almost surreal to him. There were no scowls of suspicion at his every move, no sense that he was replaceable at a moment's notice. Instead, there was a sense of unity, a shared purpose, and a willingness to help one another succeed. He found himself staying late sometimes, eager to absorb as much knowledge as he could. Elijah and Charlotte occasionally dropped by his section to see how he was doing, always offering words of encouragement. Elijah confided in him that he was proud to have Brandon on board, not because of the heroic act alone, but because he saw genuine potential in him. Outside of work, Brandon's life also began to blossom. He connected with an old friend who had heard about his newfound job. They chatted about the possibility of combining resources to move into a better neighborhood, or at least to share some child-friendly weekend activities. Brandon used to avoid such social invitations because he never had the funds for them. Now he felt like he could occasionally indulge in a trip to the community pool or a Saturday excursion to the local science museum. Sam was overjoyed to see more of the city, particularly the planetarium where his fascination with space grew even deeper. As father and son stared at a projection of the solar system on the enormous curved ceiling, Brandon felt a tingle of awe, not just at the vastness of space, but at how drastically his life had turned around in such a short time. About a month after starting the job, Brandon decided it was time for him and Sam to invite Elijah, Charlotte, and Oliver over for dinner. He had worried at first about reciprocating their hospitality because his apartment was still the same cramped, aging space, but he felt it was important to show gratitude and to let them see his world. Charlotte was delighted to accept the invitation, insisting that the size of the apartment did not matter. On the night of the visit, Brandon tidied up every corner, scrubbing surfaces, arranging Sam's few toys neatly, and even buying a tablecloth to cover the old scratched tabletop. He prepared a simple but hearty meal chicken with roasted vegetables and a small side salad. It was a modest menu, but he poured his care into every step of cooking. When Elijah and Charlotte arrived, bearing a bottle of wine and a small box of gourmet chocolates, Brandon felt a blush creep up his neck. They seemed genuinely pleased to be there, not the least bit uncomfortable with the humble surroundings. Oliver happily reunited with Sam, and the two boys ended up sprawled on the living room floor, constructing toy rocket ships out of plastic blocks. Over dinner, the adults shared stories about their childhoods, with Charlotte remembering the modest home she had grown up in before her parents' finances improved. She recalled that money had not mattered as much as love and unity, and that memories made in a simple house could be just as precious as those made in a mansion. Elijah agreed, adding that living well was never about flaunting wealth, but about cherishing connections and supporting each other. After the meal, as Charlotte helped Brandon clear the table, she took his hand and quietly asked if he was happy with the new job. Brandon nodded earnestly, his heart full of gratitude, explaining that it had changed his life in ways he was still coming to terms with. Charlotte smiled, her eyes brimming with warmth. She says she could see how much more relaxed he appeared, how Sam seemed so much brighter and more secure. She told him that she and Elijah believed in Second Chance's life had given them many gifts, and they were determined to pass it on. She also said that helping someone as deserving as Brandon had reaffirmed their faith in simple human kindness. Later that evening, Sam and Oliver showcased a makeshift puppet show that they had been practicing. The living room turned into a theater, with couch cushions as a stage backdrop. Using old socks and bits of string, they dramatized the story of two astronauts landing on a distant planet, discovering friendly alien monsters who needed their help. The children's laughter and creativity lit up the small space, and the adults applauded uproariously at the finale. Charlotte snapped a few photos on her phone, capturing the shining eyes of both boys as they bowed. Brandon watched from the side, his throat tight with emotion. In that shared moment of joy, the difference between their worlds vanished, replaced by a bond forged through compassion and mutual respect. As the night wound down, Brandon escorted his guests to the door. Elijah lingered for a moment, gently placing his hand on Brandon's shoulder. He told him that if he needed anything, even just advice or a listening ear, all he had to do was call. Brandon nodded, overwhelmed by the sincerity of their connection. This was no longer about a hero and a rescued child. It was about two families brought together by fate, forging a friendship that transcended social barriers. After they left, Sam, too excited to sleep, kept recounting the best parts of the evening, how Oliver had giggled at the funny voices Sam made for the sock puppet aliens, and how Charlotte had clapped so hard that her bracelet jingled. Brandon tucked Sam in with a kiss on his forehead, a gentle promise that more good days were on the horizon. The next day, back at work, Teresa approached Brandon with a bright smile. She congratulated him on passing the initial training phase with flying colors. She commented on how his coworkers had spoken highly of his diligence and positive attitude. In fact, she said she was impressed enough to consider him for a small supervisory role in the near future if he kept up the good work. Brandon felt his cheeks warm with a mixture of pride and disbelief. He thanked Teresa, promising he would not let her down. As she walked away, he allowed himself a grin. Memories of all the rejection letters blurred into distant echo sheer he was, thriving in an environment where his contributions mattered. Brandon's transformation did not go unnoticed by the people who knew him best. Sam's teacher sent a note home saying that Sam seemed happier, more engaged, and more confident in class. A neighbor who once heard Brandon pacing anxiously in the hallway at night now observed him walking with calmer steps, shoulders no longer slumped. Even the landlord, gruff as he was, greeted Brandon with a nod of approval when they crossed paths. A few acquaintances reached out to him, some inquiring if he was the same railroad hero they had seen on the news. Brandon never boasted, but he admitted it was him, offering a polite shrug as if to say it was not a big deal, even though they both knew it was. As weeks turned to months, Brandon and Sam found themselves on the brink of another major change. With steady paychecks and some savings, plus the cushion from that initial check Elijah and Charlotte had given him, Brandon started looking at new housing options. One afternoon, he picked Sam up from school and they visited a small townhouse complex just a few bus stops away from the manufacturing plant. The neighborhood was safer, dotted with trees, and had a playground and a library within walking distance. They toured a unit with freshly painted walls and new carpeting, a stark contrast to their current place with its peeling wallpaper and creaking floorboards. Sam ran around the empty living room, imagination already filling it with ideas for furniture arrangement and possible hiding spots for games of tag. Brandon felt a lump in his throat as he pictured them living there, making fresh memories, building a new life. With cautious optimism, Brandon signed the lease for the townhouse. He did not want to jump at the first opportunity without making sure he could handle the monthly payments, but the numbers worked out, and the place felt right for them. The day they moved, Elijah and Charlotte arrived with Oliver, offering not just moral support, but also a truck and extra hands to carry boxes. Teresa from work dropped by briefly to drop off a housewarming gift, a set of nice dinner plates. Several coworkers sent texts wishing him luck in the new place. Brandon felt a profound sense of community. He had never expected so many people to care about him and Sam. As they carried boxes inside, Sam shouted about how he wanted to set up a telescope in his room so he could watch the stars. Oliver bounced around, talking about how he would come visit and bring his own toys for epic space adventures. Elijah, flexing muscles from years of weekend carpentry, hauled in furniture and asked Brandon for the best spot to place it. Charlotte organized the kitchen, marveling at how bright and airy it felt. For the first time in what felt like forever, Brandon did not worry about bills or job interviews or rejection. He just felt gratitude and excitement. Once the boxes were stacked and the furniture was in place, Charlotte suggested they celebrate with a small party. Brandon, still reluctant to spend too much, hesitated, but Elijah insisted on taking care of the arrangements. Within hours, a few more people from work trickled in with pizza, snacks, and sparkling cider. Sam gave an improvised tour, proudly showing off the modest, yet welcoming rooms to everyone who came. They laughed, they ate, and they cheered for Brandon's new beginnings. The scene was a stark contrast to the day he had rescued Oliver when everything was frantic and uncertain. Now, it was a night filled with warmth, laughter, and a sense that good things truly can arise from moments of selfless bravery. In the weeks that followed, Brandon adapted well to his new role in logistics. He excelled at managing shipping schedules, double-checking orders, and forging relationships with drivers and suppliers. Teresa, true to her word, put him on track for a supervisory position after noticing how well he handled unexpected challenges. Word around the plant was that shipments were running more efficiently under Brandon's watch, and morale was higher in his section. Employees commented on how his calm, supportive demeanor eased tensions during stressful deadlines. Even corporate executives took note. At a quarterly meeting, Elijah presented the division's success, giving credit to Brandon for spearheading improvements. Brandon, in turn, credited his teammates, but people still recognized he was the linchpin who made them all work better together. Outside of work, Sam flourished in his new school, making friends who lived nearby. The two families, Brandon and Sam, and Elijah, Charlotte, and Oliver, continued to bond, sharing outings to museums, picnics in the park, and even occasional weekend trips to the countryside, where Elijah's family had a small cabin. Sam and Oliver found joy in exploring the woods, splashing in a shallow creek, and trying to catch fireflies at dusk. Brandon and Elijah would talk about work, fatherhood, and the unexpected twists of life that brought them together. Charlotte often reflected on how a near tragedy could turn into a blessing, forging connections that might never have existed otherwise. Time slipped by, marked by small milestones: a successful shipping season at the plant, Sam's first science fair at his new school, Oliver's birthday party, and eventually the holidays approaching. As the city streets started to twinkle with festive lights, Brandon realized how close the anniversary of the rescue was. In the hustle of life's improvements, he had not forgotten that pivotal day when everything changed. He sometimes felt a tinge of guilt, remembering the mother's screams, the stroller's wheels stuck in the track, and the thunderous roar of the train. But when he looked at Oliver's bright smile and Charlotte's grateful eyes, he realized that moment, as terrifying as it was, had become the spark that lit a new path for everyone involved. Brandon decided to commemorate the event in a small, meaningful way. One evening, after Sam had gone to bed, he called Charlotte, suggesting that on the anniversary of the rescue, they should gather at the railway crossing, place some flowers in gratitude that Oliver's life had been spared, and then enjoy a meal together. Charlotte, touched by the idea, agreed enthusiastically. She suggested they invite some of the close friends who had become part of their extended circle. The plan took shape quietly, without fanfare or media attention, just a private remembrance. On the chosen day, Brandon finished up his shift a bit early, picking up Sam from school and heading to the crossing as twilight fell. The air was chilly, the sky streaked with hints of pink and orange as the sun set. The same warning lights blinked at intervals, though the city had started upgrading the safety measures with additional signage. Elijah and Charlotte arrived with Oliver, dressed warmly in jackets and hats, carrying a small bouquet of fresh lilies. Sam clutched a small stuffed bear he had brought to give Oliver as a keepsake to remind him of the day that almost went terribly wrong, but instead led them all to a happier fate. With quiet reverence, Charlotte approached the rail, placing the flowers near the spot where the stroller had been lodged. She shed a few tears, then turned to Brandon with a trembling smile. She whispered her thanks, not just for saving Oliver, but for everything that had come afterwards, the friendships, the shared experiences, the blossoming of a new support system. Oliver, though still too young to fully understand, pressed himself close to Charlotte's side, looking up at Brandon with curiosity. Elijah wrapped an arm around his son, leaning in to explain that this was the place where Brandon had saved him. Oliver nodded solemnly, as if sensing the significance. Brandon stood there, feeling the weight of that day's memory, not as a burden, but as a profound reminder of how life can pivot on a single choice. Sam stepped forward, placing his stuffed bear on the railroad tie next to the lilies. For just a moment, as a small symbolic gesture, the old squeak of the rails echoed in the distance, but no train was scheduled to pass at that hour, which allowed them a peaceful moment of reflection. Afterwards, the little group headed to a cozy diner nearby, a favorite spot of Elijah and Charlotte's, which was known for hearty soups and homemade pies. Over steaming bowls of stew, crusty bread, and slices of fresh pie, they reminisced about everything that had happened in the past year. The conversation was warm and full of gentle laughter. They talked about Sam's improved grades, Oliver's newfound love for painting, Brandon's progress at the plant, and how Charlotte had helped organize a charity drive for families in need. That dinner was not just a casual meal, it was a celebration of life, community, and second chances. As the evening winded down, Elijah pulled Brandon aside, the din of the busy diner creating a veil of privacy around them. He told Brandon that the board of the company had been impressed with his logistics work and that they intended to offer him a permanent supervisor role. If things went well, there might even be a managerial path open to him in the next few years. Brandon was speechless, and he had to swallow a lump in his throat before he could say anything. He thanked Elijah, who shook his hand firmly, telling him that this was only the beginning. Brandon realized that, in some ways, he now had the power to help others who were struggling, just as Elijah and Charlotte had helped him. When they all parted ways that night, Brandon returned home with Sam, tucking him into bed in the bedroom that had once been a daydream. He stood at the window for a while, gazing out at the street below, the soft glow of streetlights illuminating the neatly kept lawn. His mind wandered back to how each event had led him here, the job rejections, the despair, the single act of selflessness, and the resulting chain reaction that had opened doors he never knew existed. In a quiet prayer, or perhaps just a moment of gratitude to the universe, he thanked whatever forces had placed him at that crossing at just the right time. Life continued in a steady, fulfilling rhythm. Brandon's new supervisor role brought challenges, more meetings, bigger responsibilities, and the occasional stress of ensuring deadlines were met. But he thrived under the pressure, buoyed by the unwavering support of his colleagues and the guidance of Teresa, who now treated him more like a trusted lieutenant than a trainee. At home, Sam excelled in school projects, especially those related to science, and Brandon, with a steadier schedule and a better salary, was able to engage more with his son's interests. They built model rockets on weekends, visiting local parks to launch them, the miniature crafts whooshing skyward in bright plumes of excitement. Meanwhile, Elijah and Charlotte balanced the demands of running a large business with raising Oliver, who was quickly growing into a creative, kind-hearted child. The two families got together for barbecues and movie nights, forging memories that transcended the initial sense of gratitude. They had become a kind of extended family, choosing each other, not bound by blood, but by the bond of compassion and shared experiences. Sometimes they would jokingly refer to each other as the train track tribe, a lighthearted nod to the dramatic event that had brought them together. In quieter moments, Brandon still felt awe that the path he walked now was so different from the lonely road of constant rejection he had known before. One evening, after Sam had gone to bed, Brandon received an unexpected phone call from a local news reporter. Apparently, the story of the railroad rescue had begun circulating again on social media, commemorating its anniversary. People were curious to hear from Brandon, to find out how he was doing. The reporter asked if he would be willing to do a small follow-up segmenta, "Where are they now?" kind of piece. Brandon hesitated, uncertain about reopening that chapter in a public forum. He had grown used to a stable, private life, not the fleeting fame that had come from the viral videos. Yet, a part of him thought it might be nice to highlight a positive story in a world where the news was often filled with negativity. And maybe it would be good for Sam to see that sometimes sharing uplifting stories could inspire others. He called Elijah for advice. Elijah suggested that it might be beneficial to share how an act of bravery can lead to ripple effects of kindness and new opportunities. Charlotte agreed, noting that the world could use more feel-good stories. Still, Brandon needed to ensure the focus would be on the message, gratitude, unity, and hope, and not on sensationalizing the moment of danger. Eventually, with some trepidation, Brandon agreed to do a short interview. The reporter was respectful, meeting him at the family business after hours. They filmed a brief segment in the warehouse, capturing the hum of machines in the background, while Brandon spoke softly about how his life had changed. He talked about the struggle of unemployment, how he had almost given up hope, and how, in a fateful moment, he reacted on instinct to save a young child. He emphasized that he never sought recognition or reward, that everything that happened afterwards was a testament to the generosity of strangers who became friends. He gestured to the bustling plant around him, explaining how he found more than just a job here. He found a sense of purpose and belonging. The reporter asked if he had any final words for viewers. Brandon looked into the camera, heart pounding, and said that sometimes all it takes is a moment of courage to transform a life, and that we should never underestimate the power of kindness from both the giving and receiving ends. The short interview aired a week later on the local news, and social media picked it up again, reviving interest in Brandon's story. People commented on how heartwarming it was, how they wished the world had more stories like this. The cynical corners of the internet made a few jokes, but overall, the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Brandon found himself once again receiving messages, not from people wanting to identify him, but from folks who were touched by the story and wanted to share their own tales of how small acts of kindness had changed their lives. He spent an evening replying to as many messages as he could, feeling a renewed sense of how interconnected humanity could be when people let empathy guide them. Months turned into a full year and beyond. Brandon settled into a life that felt stable and fulfilling, paying bills on time, planning a small vacation for Sam during school breaks, even considering taking some night classes to further his education and grow within the company. Sam grew taller, wiser, and more confident, always pointing out that his dad was a hero. Brandon would laugh and remind Sam that real heroes came in many forms: teachers, doctors, volunteers, anyone who put others before themselves in big or small ways. Elijah and Charlotte, pleased with Brandon's ongoing success, continued to involve him in higher-level discussions about the direction of the family business. While he was still relatively new compared to some veteran employees, they valued his perspective, especially his empathy for workers at every level. They had once teased him that he was like a hidden gem the universe had revealed to them. Brandon insisted that he was just a simple man trying to do right by his family. In time, the raw intensity of the rescue day faded into memory, overshadowed by the new joys, challenges, and milestones of daily life. Yet it remained a pivotal moment that forever altered the trajectories of two families. On especially tough days when the shipping department faced deadlines or Sam came home frustrated with homework, Brandon would remember that day on the tracks. He would recall the adrenaline coursing through his veins, the instant when he lifted the stroller free, and how a breath of difference in timing could have changed everything. That recollection kept him grounded, reminding him that each day was a gift not to be taken for granted. It reminded him that second chances could appear unexpectedly, and that by embracing them, one could unlock a future better than any he dared to dream. In the end, the reward was not just the six-figure check or the secure position at a thriving company. The real reward was the sense of belonging, the friendships forged, and the belief that goodness could ripple outward from one act of courage. Brandon Miller, once a struggling dad trudging home after yet another job rejection, had discovered that life could pivot in a single moment of selflessness that saved a child from a speeding train. That moment had opened a door to a new life, brimming with promise and connection, reminding everyone who heard his story that hope can spark in the most unlikely circumstances, and that family is sometimes formed by something deeper than blood. the shared belief that we are all here to look out for one another.